to good company and better whiskey. That goes without saying. Amen to that.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
The evening sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose as Eliza Mae Cooper rushed through the back door of the Dusty Trails Inn. Her arms loaded with fresh linens. Her arms loaded with fresh linens. Her boots, still damp from the afternoon rain, betrayed her on the worn wooden floors. She had been working at the inn for 3 weeks now. Ever since her father's passing had left her with nothing but debt and a worn-out wagon, the small town of Cedar Hollow had seemed like a good place to start over, a quiet corner of Wyoming territory where nobody knew her name or her troubles. The bathhouse sat behind the main building, a modest structure with 4 private rooms where weary travelers could wash away the dust of the trail. Mrs. Such away the dust of the trail. Mrs. Invariably Pemberton, the inn's owner, had given Eliza strict instructions to deliver fresh towels to room number 3 before the evening rush. Eliza balanced the stack of linens against her hip and pushed open the door with her shoulder. Steam billowed out, warm and thick, carrying the scent of pine soap. She took 2 steps inside before her feet betrayed her completely. The world tilted sideways. The world tilted sideways. The linens flew upward like startled doves, and Eliza Mae Cooper found herself tumbling directly toward the copper bathtub. In the center of the room, a pair of strong hands caught her just before she would have plunged face first into the water. Those hands gripped her forearms with surprising gentleness, steadying her against the edge of the tub while her heart hammered against her ribs. For a moment, neither of them moved. Eliza's eyes traveled up a pair of tanned forearms, across broad shoulders glistening with water droplets, to a face that seemed carved from the same rugged landscape that surrounded Cedar Hollow. Dark hair, wet, and pushed back from a forehead, creased with surprise. Eyes the color of whiskey held to firelight. A jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. The man's expression shifted from alarm to something that might have been amusement, though his grip on her arms remained firm. Eliza felt heat rush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the steam filling the room. She scrambled backward, her boots slipping again on the wet floor, and this time the stranger held on tighter. His voice came low and warm, touched with a hint of laughter. "Easy there, miss. That floor's slicker than a greased pig at a county fair." She found her footing at last and pulled free from his grasp, averting her eyes while her face burned crimson. The water in the tub came up past his chest, preserving his modesty, but the impropriety of the situation struck her full force. Words tumbled from her lips in a rush. "I am so terribly sorry. Mrs. So terribly sorry," Mrs. Pemberton said. "This room was empty. I was just bringing towels. I never would have. I mean to say, if I had known someone was by. That you I mean to say, if I had known someone was Gus, she trailed off, pressing her hands to her flaming cheeks. The man leaned back in the tub, apparently unconcerned about his state of undress. That hint of laughter grew more pronounced around the corners of his mouth. "Well, I reckon the room was empty when I came in." Mrs. Pemberton must have forgotten to flip the sign on the door. Eliza risked a glance at him, then quickly looked away again. "I'll just gather these linens and leave you to your privacy." She dropped to her knees and began collecting the scattered towels. Her movements jerky and uncoordinated as scattered towels. Her movements jerky and uncoordinated. One had landed dangerously close to the tub, and she stretched to reach it without looking in the stranger's direction. His hand closed over hers before she could grab the fabric. The touch sent a jolt through her entire body. She looked up, startled, and found him watching her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. He spoke quietly, all traces of amusement gone from his voice. "You're shaking." She was. She had not noticed until he pointed it out, but her hands trembled like leaves in a windstorm, whether from embarrassment or exhaustion or something else, entirely she could not say. The stranger released her hand and reached for a towel that had landed on a nearby stool. He wrapped it around his shoulders, then gestured toward the small bench against the wall. "Sit down a moment. You look like you're about to fall over again." Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. Eliza sank onto the bench and pressed her palms against her knees to still their shaking. Steam curled around her, warm and oddly comforting. The man watched her with those whiskey-colored eyes, his expression thoughtful. "You work here at the inn?" She nodded. 3 weeks now. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face in a way that made her feel both exposed and strangely seen. "You're not from around here." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "Missouri. I came west after my father died." Something flickered in his gaze, something that looked almost like recognition, not of her specifically, but of her circumstances. Of that particular kind of grief that leaves a person untethered from everything they once knew. His voice softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." The simple words, spoken without pity or excessive sentiment, loosened something in Eliza's chest. She had heard countless condolences over the past months, but this man's quiet acknowledgement felt different somehow. More genuine. She found her voice. "Thank you." It was his heart. Gave out one morning while he was feeding the horses. Doctor said he probably didn't feel a thing. The stranger nodded slowly. "My mother passed 2 winters ago. Pneumonia. I was 3 days' ride away when it happened. Didn't make it back in time to say goodbye." Their eyes met across the steam-filled room. In that moment, Eliza felt something pass between them, an understanding that required no further words. They were both people who had lost pieces of themselves, and were still learning how to walk through the world with those pieces missing. She realized with a start that she had been sitting the bathhouse far longer than was proper. Rising quickly, she gathered the remaining linens into a messy pile. "I should let you finish your bath. Again, I apologize for the intrusion." He raised a hand to stop her. "Wait, you never told me your name." She hesitated at the door. "Eliza. Eliza Mae Cooper." A smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Well, Miss Eliza Mae Cooper, I'm Jackson Hollister. Most folks call me Jack." He paused, that smile deepening. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again." Eliza fled before he could see the fresh blush spreading across her cheeks. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the Dusty Trails Inn. A cattle drive had passed through the night before, and the dining room was packed with hungry cowboys, demanding breakfast. Eliza moved between tables with plates of eggs and biscuits, her feet aching, and her arms burning from the weight of the heavy serving trays. She spotted him the moment he walked in. Jackson Hollister had cleaned up considerably since their encounter in the bathhouse. His dark hair was combed back neatly, his jaw freshly shaved. He wore a blue cotton shirt that matched the Wyoming sky, and a leather vest that had seen better days but somehow looked exactly right on his broad frame. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and that smile from the night before returned. Eliza nearly dropped the coffee pot she was carrying. She managed to compose herself as he took a seat at a small table near the window. When she approached to take his order, her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Good morning, Mr. Hollister. What can I get for you?" He leaned back in his chair, looking up at her with an expression of mock formality. "Good morning, Miss Cooper. I believe I'll have whatever you recommend." She raised an eyebrow. "The eggs are fresh, and Mrs. Pemberton makes biscuits that could make a grown man weep." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Then I'll have both, and coffee, if there's any left after you've poured it on my boots." She glanced down at his feet, realizing she had been holding the coffee pot at a precarious angle. Heat flooded her cheeks as she righted it. "I'll try to aim for your cup instead." The morning passed in a blur of orders and dirty dishes, but Eliza found her gaze drifting to Jackson's table again and again. He ate slowly, seeming in no hurry to leave, and she noticed he was watching her too. When the breakfast rush finally subsided, and most of the cowboys had headed out to rejoin their drive, Jackson remained. Eliza approached his table with the coffee pot, more as an excuse than out of any genuine belief that he needed a refill. He pushed his empty plate aside and gestured to the chair across from him. "You look like you could use a rest. Sit with me. A minute." She glanced toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Pemberton was visible through the doorway, elbow deep in dish suds. The older woman caught her eye and gave a small nod of permission. Eliza sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The morning light streaming through the window caught the amber flecks in Jackson's eyes, and Eliza found herself noticing details she had missed in the steam-hazed bathhouse. A small scar above his left eyebrow. The way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. The calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work. He broke the silence first. "How did Yo end up in Cedar Hollow? If you don't mind my asking. It's not exactly on the main roads." Eliza traced a finger along the grain of the wooden table. "My father's wagon broke down about 5 miles outside of town. The axle snapped clean through. I was trying to make it to California, but I didn't have the money to fix it. Mrs. Pemberton offered me work in exchange for room and board." She shrugged. "Seemed like as good a place as any to stop running." Jackson's gaze grew thoughtful, running from something, or to something, or to something. The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. She considered lying, giving him the simple answer that most people expected. But something about the way he looked at her made her want to tell the truth. "Both, I suppose. Running from the memories, running towards something better. I don't know if such a thing exists, but I figured I had to try." He nodded slowly, as if her words confirmed something he had already suspected. "I've been doing some running of my own. Got a ranch about 20 miles north of here. Been in my family for 2 generations. After my mother passed, I couldn't stand to be there anymore. Every room reminded me of her. So I hired some men to look after the place, and I've been drifting ever since." Eliza studied his face, seeing the grief that lingered behind his easy smile. Did it help? The drifting. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. "No, it didn't. But I wasn't ready to go back, wasn't ready to face the empty spaces where she used to be." He met her eyes. "Maybe now I am." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that they had both been wandering through their grief, and had somehow improbably found each other in this small corner of the world. Over the following weeks, Jackson became a fixture at the Dusty Trails Inn. He took a room on the second floor and spent his days helping out around the property, fixing loose boards and mending fences without being asked. Mrs. Cale Day. Pemberton protested at first, insisting that a paying guest shouldn't be doing manual labor, but Jackson just smiled and kept working. Eliza watched him from the window while she folded linens, noticing the efficient way he moved and the kindness he showed to everyone he encountered. He helped the elderly Mr. Benton Patterson carry his luggage upstairs. He played checkers with young Tommy O'Brien, the stable boy, and let the child win every time. He treated Eliza with a gentle respect that made her heart ache in ways she didn't fully understand. Their conversations grew longer, deeper. He told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his mother's laugh and his father's calloused hands, and the way the prairie looked in autumn when the grass turned gold. She told him about Missouri, about her father's kindness and her mother's death when she was just a child, and the quiet loneliness that had followed her ever since. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of fire, they sat together on the inn's front porch. And the sky, in shades of fire. They sat together on the inn's front porch, The air was cool, carrying the first hints of approaching autumn, and Eliza had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Jackson sat close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Their shoulders nearly touched, and neither of them moved to increase the distance. He spoke without looking at her, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I've been thinking about going back to the ranch." Eliza's heart contracted painfully. She had known this moment would come, had tried to prepare herself for it, but the reality of his words still struck her like a physical blow. She kept her voice steady. "I think that's a good idea. You can't run forever." He turned to face her then, and the intense tie in his eyes made her breath catch. "Come with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza stared at him. Certain she had misheard. He reached out and took her hand, his collaged palm warm against her fingers. "I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. But Eliza, I've never met anyone who understood me the way you do. When I think about going back to that empty ranch, about facing all those memories alone, I can't do it. But when I think about facing them with you beside me," he trailed off, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "It doesn't seem so impossible." Tears burned in Eliza's eyes. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her heart to keep out further pain. And here was this man, this kind and gentle and broken man, asking her to tear those walls down. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Jackson, I don't know if I can be what you need. I'm still so lost myself." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was achingly tender. "Then we'll be lost together. And maybe, in finding each other, we'll find ourselves too." She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. All her life, she had been searching for a place to belong. She had thought she might find it in California, in some unknown future that always seemed just out of reach. But perhaps the longing was not a place at all. Perhaps it was a person. When she opened her eyes, Jackson was watching her, with a hope that was almost painful to witness. She saw in his face everything she had been afraid to want: a home, a future, a love that could withstand the losses they had both endured. She spoke before she could lose her courage. "Yes." His eyes widened. "Yes." A smile broke across her face, tremulous and bright. "Yes, I'll come with you. Yes to the ranch. Yes to the ranch. Yes to facing the memories together. Yes to whatever comes next." Jackson's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while the stars began to emerge overhead. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, a rhythm that seemed to match her own. He pulled back just far enough to look into her eyes. "I promise you, Eliza Mae Cooper, I will spend the rest of my days making you glad you said yes." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. "You already have." The wedding took place 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning at the small church in Cedar Hollow. Mrs. 9 to the small church in Cedar Hollow. Mrs. 9 3 thing. "The mess is mad." Pemberton wept into her handkerchief throughout the ceremony. Tommy O'Brien served as ring bearer and only dropped the rings once. The whole town turned out to celebrate. Having watched the love story unfold over the preceding weeks with the invested interest of people who had too little romance in their own lives, Eliza wore a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Pemberton had sewn together by lamplight over many long evenings. Jackson wore a suit that had belonged to his father, carefully preserved and only slightly too big across the shoulders. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with a tenderness husband and wife. Jackson kissed her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to Eliza's eyes. In that moment, surrounded by people who had become like family, she felt the last of her grief begin to loosen its grip on her heart. The ranch was everything Jackson had described and more. The house stood solid, and proud against the Wyoming sky. Its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. The barn needed work, and the fences required mending, and there was enough to do to keep them busy for years. But there was also beauty. Rolling prairie stretching to the horizon, mountains rising blue and distant in the west, a creek that ran clear and cold behind the house, perfect for waiting on hot summer days, and everywhere, traces of the people who had loved this land before them. Jackson's mother's garden, overgrown but still blooming with hardy wildflowers. His father's initials carved into the barn door, a rocking chair on the front porch, where 3 generations of Hollisters had watched the sunset. On their first night in the house, Eliza stood at the bedroom window and looked out at the stars. They seemed brighter here than anywhere else she had been, scattered across the sky, like diamonds on black velvet. Jackson came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. His voice was soft. "What are you thinking about?" She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I'm thinking about my father, about how he always used to say that everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see it at the time." Jackson pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you believe that?" Eliza considered the question carefully. She thought about all the pain she had endured, the loss and loneliness and despair that had driven her west. She thought about a broken wagon axle in a small town called Cedar Hollow, and a bathhouse encounter that had changed the course of her life. A smile curved her lips. "I'm starting to." The years that followed brought their share of challenges, harsh winters that tested their resolve, a drought that nearly cost them the ranch, a miscarriage that left them both grieving for a child they would never know. But the years also brought joy. A son with his father's whiskey-colored eyes, a son with his father's whiskey-colored eyes, a daughter with her mother's stubborn chin. Laughter echoing through rooms that had once stood empty and silent. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, Eliza and Jackson sat together on the front porch, watching their children chase fireflies across the darkening prairie. The rocking chair creaked beneath them as Jackson pulled her closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. He spoke quietly, his voice roughened by years of Wyoming. "Wind, do you remember the day we met?" Eliza laughed, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "How could I forget? I nearly drowned you." His chest rumbled with laughter. "You fell into my bath looking like a startled kitten. I knew right then that my life was never going to be boring again." She tilted her head to look up at him, studying the face she had come to know better than her own. The lines around his eyes had deepened. Silver threads had begun to appear in his dark hair. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine and full of love. She reached up and traced that smile with her fingertip. "You caught me that day. You've been catching me ever since." He turned his head and kissed her palm. "And I'll keep catching you, Eliza Mae Hollister, for as long as I live." Their daughter's squeal of delight rang out across the prairie as she captured a firefly in her cupped hands. Their son ran to see, his small boots thudding against the earth. The sound of their laughter mixed with the evening chorus of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Eliza closed her eyes and breathed in the moment, this perfect ordinary moment that she would never have experienced if she had not slipped on a wet floor in a small-town bathhouse. She had come west, looking for a new beginning. She had found something far better. She had found home. The end.